The galaxy had grown comfortable in its own power. For decades, the Imperial Command ruled almost every star system, and life under their authority felt predictable to everyone involved. In the grand halls of their command centers, generals and admirals spoke in calm voices about routine patrols, trade disputes, and minor uprisings on remote planets. They had grown so used to being unchallenged that the idea of a real threat seemed laughable. Most officers dismissed rumors of a hidden human fleet as old stories, myths told to frighten children in distant colonies. Humans, after all, were supposed to have disappeared from the galaxy long ago. On the busy spaceports of the Empire, ships launched and landed with clockwork precision. Merchant vessels carried goods from one star system to another, protected by squadrons of warships that rarely saw action. Civilian life thrived in the safety provided by the Empire, and most people went about their lives without ever questioning the authority of the command. Officials patrolled the corridors of power, issuing reports that contained more numbers than reality, confident that the galaxy's stability was guaranteed. The sense of calm was so strong that even minor anomalies were ignored, written off as sensor errors or miscommunications. Yet, far beyond the borders that the Empire watched so closely, humans were quietly preparing for a return. On planets far from the eyes of the Empire, they had rebuilt their fleet in secret, using technology that no one had seen before. Every ship was sleek, designed for speed and precision rather than showy displays of power. Humans worked together with careful planning, testing each ship and every weapon until it met their exacting standards. They trained not just to fight, but to think, to anticipate the moves of a much larger and more arrogant opponent. Every day, the human fleet grew stronger, ready to remind the galaxy that they had never truly disappeared. Back within the Imperial Command, officers went about their usual routines. In one command center, a group of admirals monitored sectors that stretched across hundreds of light years. They discussed reports of minor skirmishes at the edge of the Empire and assigned fleets to respond. A colonel suggested investigating strange sensor readings near a distant system, but his concerns were dismissed with a casual wave of a hand. "It is probably just a technical error," one general said, smiling as if the idea of a real threat was absurd. The other officers nodded in agreement, their confidence unshaken. Meanwhile, human scouts moved silently across the outer systems, recording every movement of Imperial ships and learning their routines. They discovered weaknesses in patrol schedules, gaps in fleet formations, and even flaws in communication protocols. The humans did not rush. They waited for the perfect moment, knowing that a hasty attack would expose them too soon. Each day, they analyzed the Empire's strategies, refining their own plans and preparing for the moment when the galaxy would finally see them again. In the Empire's distant colonies, life continued as usual. Traders argued over prices, children played in the streets of futuristic cities, and workers maintained massive energy plants without fear. No one suspected that the calm was fragile. The reports of ghost ships circulating in some outer colonies were dismissed as exaggerations or tall tales. Officials laughed at the idea that humans, long thought extinct, could return to challenge the Empire. Yet those who told the stories spoke in hushed tones, their voices carrying an urgency that the Empire's leaders refused to hear. At night, aboard the human fleet hidden in remote asteroid fields, the crew prepared for what they had been waiting for years. Engineers calibrated weapons and shields, ensuring that every system functioned perfectly. Pilots ran simulations, flying through virtual sectors that mirrored real Imperial patrol routes. Officers reviewed strategies with careful attention, discussing possible scenarios and how to adapt in the face of unexpected threats. Despite the intensity of their work, there was a calm determination among them. Every human on board knew the importance of patience and precision. They were not merely seeking revenge or chaos. They aimed to reclaim their place in the galaxy. With intelligence and courage, The first hints of change began in the outer sectors, where sensors suddenly recorded unidentified vessels moving at speeds that defied previous understanding. Imperial scouts reported fleeting glimpses of formations that vanished before confirmation could arrive. Fleet commanders initially assumed errors, blaming sensor malfunctions or rogue asteroids. Yet the strange movements continued, growing bolder and more coordinated. Every report reached the Empire in a flood of uncertainty, each one a quiet warning that something extraordinary was approaching in one command center. A senior officer rubbed his eyes in frustration. "We are seeing things that shouldn't exist," he muttered. His colleagues shared his concern, but were unwilling to accept the possibility of humans returning. The Empire had believed for generations that humans were a story from the past, a legend that could inspire awe but pose no real danger. But now, the evidence was undeniable. Something human was out there, moving with purpose, intelligence, and precision. The calm that the Empire had relied upon was starting to crack, and with it, the confidence that had sustained generations of leaders. As days passed, whispers spread through the corridors of the command centers. Fleet captains exchanged hurried messages, each adding details of strange encounters. Imperial officers began to question their assumptions, realizing that perhaps they had been overconfident. The Empire, so used to its own dominance, had grown complacent. They had never imagined an enemy capable of exploiting their weaknesses with such foresight. Every patrol route, every communication channel, and every fleet formation was suddenly vulnerable to a force that the Empire had long dismissed. And yet, humans waited. They did not strike recklessly. Each movement was calculated, designed to test the Empire without revealing the full extent of their strength. In their hidden bases, they watched Imperial ships, noting patterns and weaknesses. They prepared for a time when they could reveal themselves fully, making sure that when the moment came, it would leave the Empire unprepared and in awe. In the quiet of the Empire's supposedly secure sectors, small ripples of fear began to appear. Officers who had never questioned orders before now paused when strange reports arrived. Some tried to dismiss the evidence, but doubt had taken root. The galaxy had grown used to the Empire's absolute control, but now that certainty was gone. The invisible hand of humans, moving in secret, reminded everyone that no power was eternal, and even the greatest empires could be challenged when they least expected it. The calm before the storm was ending. The Empire had not seen what was coming, and humans were ready to step out of the shadows. Their fleet, built in secrecy, would soon remind the galaxy of a truth that had been forgotten. Intelligence, courage, and patience could triumph over arrogance. And even those believed to be lost could return to shape the future. By the time the first human ships appeared on Imperial sensors, the Empire was unprepared, confident that myths could not hurt them. The humans had waited, studied, and perfected their plan, and now, in the silence of deep space, they were ready to make the galaxy remember that they had never truly disappeared. The first signs of something unusual began to spread like wildfire through the outer sectors. Imperial sensors had detected anomalies, small blips at first, appearing for mere seconds before vanishing without explanation. Fleet captains initially thought it was a glitch in the equipment. No known technology could account for the speed and movement they were seeing. Yet each day, the blips became more frequent, more precise, and more coordinated. Reports of strange formations moving through space at impossible velocities began to reach the higher command. The Imperial officers, who had always dismissed rumors about humans, suddenly felt a twinge of unease. The first real contact came in a system near the fringe of known space. An Imperial patrol fleet was monitoring a shipping route when they noticed a fleet of vessels emerging seemingly out of nowhere. At first, the patrol assumed they were allies, or perhaps a lost convoy. But the formations were unfamiliar, too perfect, too deliberate to be random. Sensors picked up weapon signatures, unlike anything cataloged before. The patrol commander ordered a cautious approach, sending out recognition signals, but the ships didn't respond in the way any known civilization would. They moved with precision, anticipating maneuvers and positioning themselves in a way that made conventional attacks useless. The patrol's first encounter with these unknown vessels ended disastrously. Several Imperial ships were disabled within minutes, their shields pierced and systems disrupted in ways that left engineers scrambling. Reports of the event reached the command center, where officers struggled to comprehend what was happening. "How can this be?" one general muttered, staring at the star charts. The fleet had been trained to anticipate threats, to outmaneuver any enemy, yet this new force seemed to think several steps ahead. Panic began to ripple through the command hierarchy. In distant colonies, news of the attack spread quickly, though often in fragmented pieces. Traders returning from the affected sectors described fleets appearing without warning, striking and disappearing before a proper counterattack could be organized. Farmers and miners on isolated planets told stories of sudden blackouts and disrupted communications. Even though many dismissed these accounts as exaggeration, a growing sense of curiosity and fear began to take hold among the population. Something had returned, and whatever it was not bound by the rules the galaxy had become accustomed to. Back on the human fleet, officers observed the Empire's reaction with careful satisfaction. Every move, every delayed response from the Imperial command was noted. They had studied the Empire for years, learning not just its strengths, but its weaknesses. Humans had chosen their moment deliberately, striking where the Empire's arrogance was greatest and its preparation weakest. This was not a mindless attack. It was a demonstration of skill, strategy, and patience. Humans struck quickly, withdrew immediately, and left confusion in their wake. It was a methodical approach, designed to show the Empire that their return was neither random nor accidental. Imperial command struggled to respond. Fleets were dispatched in haste, but the human strategy made coordination nearly impossible. Each time an Imperial group thought they had located the enemy, the fleet would vanish, leaving only the remnants of disabled ships and disrupted systems. Officers grew increasingly frustrated, unable to anticipate where the humans would appear next. The first few encounters had been shocks, but now a pattern of unpredictability was emerging, and it left even seasoned generals second-guessing their strategies. On one remote station, an intelligence officer worked late into the night, poring over sensor data. The officer noticed that the intrusions were not random. The humans seemed to follow certain patterns, testing the Empire's response times and exploiting predictable behaviors. It was as if the humans were not just attacking, they were teaching the Empire a lesson in humility. Each successful maneuver demonstrated foresight and careful planning. The officer made urgent notes, preparing to brief the higher-ups. Though they suspected no one would be ready to hear what the data truly revealed, Imperial panic grew as reports from different sectors arrived simultaneously. In some systems, entire supply lines were disrupted. In others, colonies lost communication with the Empire for days. The human fleet appeared to strike and vanish with ease, leaving chaos behind without causing total destruction. The Imperial command realized, perhaps too late, that the humans were not interested in mindless war. Their goal was far more sophisticated: to expose vulnerabilities and demonstrate their presence. Forcing the Empire to acknowledge that humans had returned and were far stronger than anyone had imagined. Colonies that had once relied entirely on Imperial protection began to experience a mix of fear and hope. People whispered about the possibility of humans as saviors, long thought extinct, but now returning to assert their place in the galaxy. Markets fluctuated as traders reacted to uncertainty. Local leaders convened emergency meetings, trying to maintain order as rumors of invisible fleets moving through space spread. It was a time of tension and speculation, and every report brought more questions than answers. Meanwhile, the human fleet continued its coordinated movements, each mission designed to test the Empire further. Pilots relayed data back to command, highlighting areas of weakness and unexpected resistance. Engineers adjusted shields, weapons, and propulsion systems based on real-time encounters. Officers held strategy meetings, reviewing every failed Imperial counterattack and refining their plans accordingly. Every move reinforced the humans' advantage: patience, preparation, and precise execution. Imperial officers began to question their previous confidence. They had assumed humans were gone, that the galaxy was safe under their rule. Now, they were facing an unknown adversary, capable of predicting and countering their moves. Meetings in the command center became frantic, with generals arguing about the best course of action, each blaming others for the Empire's sudden vulnerability. Strategies that had worked for decades no longer seemed effective, and the panic was spreading beyond the upper echelons of power. As the days passed, the humans' presence became undeniable. Entire sectors were aware that fleets were moving where none had expected them, and even distant colonies could feel the ripple effects. The Empire, for all its confidence and power, was learning the hard truth. Humans had returned, and they were not just a legend or a myth. They were a calculated, intelligent, and capable force, ready to reclaim their place in the galaxy. Yet the humans continued to show restraint. They did not annihilate entire fleets or destroy colonies without purpose. Their attacks were precise, tactical, and measured. This human approach baffled the Empire further, because it revealed not only strength, but also control and morality. Unlike the indiscriminate warfare the Empire sometimes employed, humans seemed guided by a principle of calculated impact, striking where necessary, but leaving opportunities for recovery and understanding. The first true battle would soon arrive. But even before it, the psychological effect on the Empire was immense. Officers who once dismissed human capabilities now feared them. Colonies once loyal to the Empire began to whisper about the possibility of change. And in the hidden bases of the human fleet, a quiet sense of accomplishment filled the air. They had demonstrated that humans were back, that the galaxy could no longer ignore them, and that patience and preparation had created a force that even the greatest empire had underestimated. In every report, in every sensor reading, the evidence was becoming undeniable. Humans were here, and they had come not by accident, but by design. The Empire was faced with the impossible task of understanding a force it had long believed extinct, and for the first time, fear replaced arrogance in the hearts of its leaders. Across distant systems, the first whispers of astonishment and uncertainty spread. Humanity, once thought gone, had returned from nowhere, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Imperial command was in chaos. What had started as disbelief had now grown into full-blown panic. Reports of human warships moving across multiple sectors, striking with precision and vanishing without warning, flooded the command centers. Generals and admirals, once confident in their control over the galaxy, were now arguing over the simplest decisions. Orders were given and then canceled. Strategies were drafted only to be replaced by new plans. And fleets that had been prepared for months were suddenly sent to the wrong coordinates. The Empire's usual efficiency had collapsed into confusion. In one high-level meeting, the air was thick with tension. Senior officers pounded fists on tables and shouted over one another, each desperate to assert their plan as the correct one. "We must strike them here." One general insisted. "No, they will appear there." Another argued, pointing at a holographic map of multiple systems. Maps and data screens flickered with sensor reports, each one contradicting the last. The humans had moved faster than the Empire had anticipated, and their unpredictability left the command paralyzed. Advisors tried to calm the generals. presenting reports and calculations, but even the most seasoned analysts could not offer a clear solution. The humans had shown that they could adapt quickly, exploit weaknesses, and appear in places where the Empire felt safe. Every Imperial plan seemed inadequate. Every fleet dispatched to intercept them was either outmaneuvered or disabled. Officers who had never questioned their own abilities now feared making a single wrong decision, knowing it could cost hundreds of ships and thousands of lives. The panic was not limited to the command centers. Across the Empire, colonies began to notice the strain in the fleet and communications. Orders that usually arrived with punctual efficiency were delayed or incorrect. Supply shipments were intercepted or mysteriously delayed. Civilian leaders who had relied on Imperial protection started to fear that no one could keep them safe. Rumors spread quickly, some accurate and others exaggerated, creating a sense of fear that the Empire's propaganda could no longer suppress. People whispered about the human fleet as if it were a force that moved faster than light, striking without warning and disappearing like ghosts dot in the midst of the chaos. Individual officers tried to make sense of the situation. Some attempted to focus on technical details, scanning sensor data for patterns that might explain the humans' movements. They noticed that the humans were not random in their attacks. Each strike, each disappearance, seemed calculated to test the Empire's response and expose its weaknesses. The humans were learning from every engagement, adapting faster than anyone had thought possible. This realization terrified the officers, because it meant that their enemy was not only powerful, but intelligent in ways that matched or exceeded their own. The pressure on commanders became unbearable. Many were forced to make decisions without complete information, relying on assumptions that often proved false. Ships were sent to intercept human vessels, only to arrive too late or find the enemy had vanished entirely. When they attempted to communicate or pursue, the humans responded with maneuvers that left Imperial forces disoriented. Every failure increased the tension among officers, each one aware that another misstep could be catastrophic. The usual confidence of the Imperial hierarchy had evaporated, replaced by doubt and fear. As the chaos grew, blame shifted rapidly. Generals accused each other of negligence. Some argued that intelligence reports had been ignored. Others claimed that fleet commanders had not acted quickly enough. Discussions that had once been professional and measured became heated arguments. Officers who had never faced real danger now spoke in urgent tones, their words filled with uncertainty and worry. The humans, who remained hidden beyond the Empire's reach, seemed to thrive on the panic they created. They had no need to fire continuously or attack relentlessly. The fear itself was a weapon. The Imperial command began to take desperate measures. Fleets were recalled from distant sectors. Resources were diverted from routine operations, and colonies were placed on high alert. Emergency drills were initiated, and soldiers were ordered to patrol more aggressively. Yet, even these efforts could not stop the humans. They had studied the Empire carefully, anticipating its moves, and now exploited every predictable action. Every attempt to contain them ended in frustration, reinforcing the belief among officers that they were facing an unprecedented threat. Meanwhile, in quiet corners of the Empire, some observers noted subtle patterns in the humans' attacks. Analysts suggested that these were not random acts of aggression, but a carefully coordinated strategy. Humans were striking key targets to expose weaknesses, gather intelligence, and test response times. Every engagement was a lesson for the Empire, and the humans were both teachers and challengers in one. This insight did little to reduce the panic, but it provided a glimmer of understanding. The humans were not mindless invaders, but patient and methodical. The psychological effect on Imperial leaders was profound. Officers who had once believed themselves invincible now questioned their competence. Some began to anticipate failure before it happened, imagining the humans appearing at the worst possible moments. The Empire, accustomed to controlling every corner of space, was suddenly vulnerable, and the fear of the unknown spread faster than any fleet could move. Meetings that had once been orderly became chaotic as leaders debated strategies that no one could fully trust. Even the highest-ranking officers were not immune to the growing terror in the colonies. Ordinary people noticed changes as well. Trading schedules were disrupted, military presence became more visible, and rumors of invisible ships moving through space created unease. Farmers, merchants, and miners, who had never cared much for politics or fleet movements, now discussed the human threat in hushed tones. The Empire's control, once absolute in these regions, felt fragile. People began to wonder if the humans were heroes returning to protect the galaxy, or a force that could bring unimaginable destruction. The mystery added to the tension, leaving everyone unsettled. Despite the chaos, the human fleet continued its silent operations. Officers aboard their ships reviewed every Imperial maneuver, learning from each encounter and adapting for the next. Pilots practiced maneuvers, engineers fine-tuned weapons, and strategists plotted paths that would maximize the humans' advantage while minimizing unnecessary destruction. Every human knew the importance of patience and precision. Unlike the Empire, which was now reacting hastily, the humans moved with calculated confidence, their restraint only increasing the sense of fear among their enemies. The Empire's panic reached a point where old rules no longer applied. Commands that had been absolute were now questioned by everyone from high-ranking officers to junior commanders. Fleets sent to intercept the humans often found themselves without clear orders or conflicting instructions. Generals argued over tactics while their ships drifted in space, waiting for impossible answers. The humans' very existence had broken the Empire's sense of control, and the inability to respond effectively made every Imperial officer feel powerless in the midst of this turmoil. Some officers attempted to rally morale. They reminded their teams of the Empire's strength, its resources, and its technology. They emphasized the training and discipline that had kept the galaxy under control for decades. But even these speeches could not erase the growing fear. The humans had introduced uncertainty into every calculation, and no amount of reassurance could return confidence that had been shattered by sudden, precise, and unpredictable attacks. Even as panic spread, the humans' goal remained clear. They did not seek to destroy indiscriminately. They wanted to make the Empire recognize them. Every successful maneuver, every fleet that vanished before retaliation, served as a message. Humans had returned, and they were more capable than the Empire had ever imagined. The psychological effect was just as important as the physical, and it was working perfectly. Imperial leaders were learning a lesson they had never expected. Arrogance and overconfidence could be as dangerous as any enemy fleet by the end of this period. The Empire's structure, once rigid and unshakable, was beginning to show cracks. Panic and confusion replaced order, fear replaced confidence, and even the most experienced officers began to doubt their own judgment. Humans, hidden in the outer sectors, watched and learned, knowing that every moment of hesitation, every misstep, and every expression of fear strengthened their position. The Imperial command, long accustomed to controlling the galaxy, had never faced an enemy like this, and they were only beginning to realize the scale of the challenge ahead, in the quiet of the hidden human bases. Officers discussed the impact of their strategy. They had not launched massive attacks, but the fear they had instilled was evident in every report from the Empire. Colonies whispered about them, fleets hesitated, and leaders argued over the simplest decisions. Patience, preparation, and intelligence had given them an advantage that brute force alone could never achieve. Humanity's return was more than a battle of ships. It was a battle of minds. And for now, the humans were winning. The Empire, for all its power and resources, had been shown a new reality. Humans were back, and they could not be ignored. The panic in the command centers was only the beginning. The true challenge. The humans did not strike blindly. Every movement they made was carefully planned, designed not only to challenge the Empire, but also to teach it a lesson. Imperial officers had begun to notice that the attacks were not random. Supply lines were disrupted, communication networks were disabled, and patrols were ambushed in ways that exposed the Empire's overconfidence. Each action seemed deliberate, as if the humans had studied the Empire for years, understanding not just its technology, but its habits, its routines, and even the arrogance of its leaders. In the Empire's command centers, the mood was tense and uncertain. Generals pored over maps, trying to predict the next human attack, but the humans always seemed to be one step ahead. One moment, fleets were sent to intercept an enemy that appeared in a remote sector. By the time the Imperial ships arrived, the humans had already moved, leaving no trace of their presence except the damage they had caused and the confusion that remained behind. The pattern was infuriatingly precise, and Imperial officers began to realize that brute force alone would not defeat this enemy. The humans' strategy was as much about psychology as it was about war. Colonies and fleets far from the front lines felt the ripple effects of their actions. Supply ships disappeared, transport stations were disrupted, and communication networks failed intermittently. These actions created doubt and fear among those who had never seen a human ship. Officers and commanders were forced to question everything they had once taken for granted: the reliability of their technology, the strength of their fleets, and the wisdom of their decisions. The humans did not need to destroy entire fleets to win. They only needed to show that they could strike anywhere and at any time. Back in the hidden bases where the human fleet had been prepared, officers and strategists studied the Empire's reactions carefully. Every movement, every dispatch, and every response was analyzed. Adjustments were made in real time, ensuring that when the humans engaged, they were always prepared for any eventuality. The fleet moved in perfect coordination, striking with speed and precision, then retreating before the enemy could effectively respond. Humans had learned the value of patience and observation. They were not reckless. They were deliberate. Every engagement was a demonstration of intelligence, skill, and control. Imperial officers began to notice patterns too late. Humans seemed to strike the points the Empire considered safe: lightly defended trade routes, isolated communication hubs, and small patrols that had previously been considered routine. These were not random attacks, but calculated strikes, designed to show the Empire that no sector was truly safe. Colonies watched in awe and fear as the humans appeared and disappeared like shadows, leaving chaos behind, but rarely destroying more than necessary. The message was clear: the humans had returned, and the Empire was no longer in control. In some remote colonies, the presence of humans sparked hope. People whispered about the return of humanity, long thought extinct, now appearing as a powerful force capable of challenging the Empire. While fear was widespread among Imperial officers and military personnel, ordinary people began to see the humans differently. Their movements were precise, efficient, and controlled. They did not destroy for the sake of destruction. They acted with purpose. For those who had suffered under Imperial rule, the humans became symbols of courage and possibility, a reminder that even the greatest empires could be challenged by intelligence and determination. On board the human ships, officers held constant briefings. Every strike was analyzed, every Imperial response recorded, and every mistake turned into a lesson. Engineers ensured that weapons and shields were functioning perfectly, while strategists calculated the most effective routes for the next operation. Pilots ran simulations to prepare for sudden engagements or unpredictable movements. Everything the humans did was measured, refined, and precise. They were not fighting for chaos. They were demonstrating mastery, patience, and intelligence. The Imperial command began to acknowledge a terrifying truth. Humans had adapted, learned, and improved faster than the Empire could anticipate. Every engagement, no matter how small, revealed flaws in the Empire's strategy. Officers who had relied on the same tactics for decades found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. The Empire's previous confidence turned into frustration and despair. Each human strike forced Imperial leaders to question everything they believed about control, preparation, and their own superiority. In one particularly tense sector, a fleet had been dispatched to intercept what was thought to be a major human force. When they arrived, there was nothing. No ships, no signals, no trace of activity. Then, in an instant, human vessels appeared at multiple points simultaneously, striking the fleet from unexpected angles and disabling ships with precision strikes. The Imperial forces were thrown into disarray, unable to regroup or retaliate effectively. Every officer aboard knew that the humans had anticipated their actions. It was not luck. It was skill, intelligence, and planning. Colonies observed these events with a mixture of fear and fascination. News of human strikes traveled quickly through trade routes, and civilians began to realize that the Empire's control was not as absolute as they had once believed. Rumors spread of humans striking outposts and supply lines, then vanishing before the Empire could respond. Farmers, traders, and ordinary citizens began to wonder what it would mean if humans continued to appear in greater numbers. The mystery of their presence captivated and unsettled everyone, giving humans an influence beyond the battlefield. Meanwhile, the human fleet maintained its discipline. No ship acted without purpose. No movement was wasted. Officers coordinated operations across multiple sectors, ensuring that every strike achieved its objective and then withdrew. Even when Imperial fleets attempted to trap them, humans adapted instantly, finding alternate routes and creating diversions that left the enemy confused. Their actions were deliberate lessons, showing the Empire that strategy, intelligence, and patience could overcome brute strength and numbers. The Imperial command, already reeling from the first encounters, now faced the realization that humans were not just back, they were superior in strategic thinking. Generals debated endlessly, trying to anticipate human movements, but the humans always seemed one step ahead. Fleets were rerouted, colonies reinforced, and communications monitored, yet the humans' presence continued to dominate the strategic landscape. Each day of uncertainty added pressure to Imperial officers, who were now struggling not only with physical threats, but also with psychological ones. As the human strategy unfolded, it became clear that they were preparing for something larger. Each strike was part of a bigger plan, designed to weaken the Empire's defenses, gather intelligence, and demonstrate their superiority. Imperial officers realized, perhaps too late, that they were being studied and tested. Every engagement taught the humans more about their opponent, while the Empire was left guessing and reacting. The humans' restraint and intelligence only increased the Empire's frustration, highlighting the vast difference in approach between the two forces. In hidden human bases, officers discussed future operations. They knew that the Empire's panic was spreading and that their strategic strikes were creating confusion and fear. Each engagement had a dual purpose: achieve tactical success, while teaching the Empire a lesson about underestimating opponents. Humans had returned not only to fight, but to show the galaxy that intelligence, patience, and courage could defeat arrogance, even in an empire that had once seemed invincible. By the end of this stage, it was undeniable. Humans had shifted the balance of power. Their strategy was more than just physical attacks. It was psychological, intellectual, and methodical. The Empire was forced to acknowledge that they had been wrong to dismiss humanity, that even the most powerful fleets could be outmaneuvered by a smaller, disciplined, and intelligent force. Fear, confusion, and respect for the humans now permeated the galaxy, and the true extent of the challenge was only beginning to be understood. Humans were no longer just appearing out of nowhere. They were teaching the Empire that every decision mattered, that overconfidence could be deadly, and that patience and planning could overcome sheer numbers. The Empire had faced many enemies before, but none with the skill, intelligence, and restraint of the human fleet. The galaxy had begun to notice, and every observer understood the same truth. Humans had returned, not recklessly, not blindly, but with purpose, strategy, and a level of control that made them an unstoppable force in the making. The Empire had grown desperate. After weeks of repeated strikes, evasions, and disruptions, the human fleet had proven that they were more than just a mysterious force. They were intelligent, disciplined, and unstoppable in strategy. Imperial generals, who had once ruled with confidence, were now debating furiously, trying to predict the humans' next move. Every decision felt like a gamble, and every mistake could cost entire fleets. It was clear that the humans were not fighting aimlessly. Each attack, each disappearance, was part of a larger plan, one that the Empire could barely comprehend. In one sector, a major Imperial fleet was assembled to finally confront the humans. Hundreds of ships, fully armed and equipped, were sent with orders to locate and destroy the enemy. The fleet's officers, however, felt uneasy. They had learned through hard experience that the humans were clever, unpredictable, and capable of outmaneuvering even the most disciplined forces. Yet the command was clear: engage and destroy. There was no room for hesitation. For the first time in decades, the Empire's pride and confidence were at stake. The humans, hidden in remote sectors, had anticipated this move. They had observed the Empire's preparations, tracked fleet movements, and calculated the most effective way to engage. Every ship in the human fleet had a role, and every officer knew their orders. They were prepared to strike with precision, using tactics that relied not on numbers alone, but on speed, intelligence, and coordination. This would be the first major engagement, and the humans intended to make it decisive. When the fleets finally met, it seemed like a normal battle at first. Imperial ships opened fire, weapons blazing, expecting a conventional confrontation. But the humans did not respond in the expected way. They moved with lightning speed, weaving through attacks and hitting the Empire's weak points. Shields were bypassed with careful precision, weapons disabled without unnecessary destruction, and entire sections of the fleet were cut off and neutralized before they could react. The battle unfolded like a carefully choreographed plan, every maneuver calculated to maximize impact and minimize risk. Imperial officers were stunned. Ships that were supposed to be invincible were being disabled within minutes. Fleets that had moved with confidence now found themselves disoriented, unsure of where the humans would appear next. Orders were shouted across communication channels, only to be met with confusion as human vessels appeared where no one had predicted. For the first time, the Empire realized that the humans were not just clever, they were masters of strategy. Able to anticipate moves that the Empire thought were secret or secured. In the midst of the chaos, the human fleet maintained discipline. No ship acted recklessly. Officers coordinated maneuvers in real time, adjusting to the Empire's reactions, always staying one step ahead. Engineers ensured that weapons and shields were functioning perfectly, while strategists monitored enemy movements, predicting their responses and planning the next strike. Even pilots, navigating through intense fire, remained calm and precise. The humans had turned the battle into a demonstration of skill, intelligence, and control. As the fight continued, the Empire's losses mounted. Entire squadrons were disabled or destroyed, and retreating ships struggled to regroup. Imperial officers, once confident in their training and numbers, were now questioning every decision. Every failed maneuver and every misstep reinforced the human superiority. Colonies that were observing the battle, even from afar, watched in awe. Messages from distant systems described fleets appearing from nowhere, striking with incredible precision, and vanishing before retaliation could occur. The humans were everywhere and nowhere at the same time, leaving both fear and admiration in their wake. The turning point came when the humans executed a coordinated maneuver that had been rehearsed for weeks. Several smaller fleets appeared simultaneously from multiple directions, surrounding the main Imperial force. Communication networks were disrupted just enough to create confusion. Ships that tried to escape were cut off, while others were forced to divert from their positions to avoid unexpected attacks. The Empire had expected a direct confrontation, but humans had transformed the battle into a complex game of strategy, using speed, intelligence, and anticipation as weapons far stronger than brute force in one particularly dramatic moment. A fleet commander realized that their most heavily armed battleship, considered the pride of the Empire, had been disabled by a strike that had targeted its shields and engines simultaneously. The humans had identified the exact weakness, exploited it, and moved on before reinforcements could arrive. It was a humbling moment for the Empire, a clear demonstration that technology and numbers alone could not secure victory against an intelligent, disciplined, and patient adversary. The psychological effect on the Empire was profound. Officers who had once believed themselves invincible now feared every decision. Fleets were hesitant, generals argued endlessly, and the confidence that had sustained the Empire for centuries was shattered. The humans had proven not only that they were back, but that they could challenge the Empire in a direct confrontation, outsmarting even the most prepared fleets. For the first time, the galaxy could see that the Empire's dominance was not unchallenged. Meanwhile, the humans remained focused on their ultimate goal. They did not pursue unnecessary destruction. Colonies and civilian populations were largely left untouched, except where strategic strikes were necessary. Every action had a purpose, demonstrating discipline, control, and intelligence. The humans were not reckless invaders. They were deliberate, precise, and strategic, using their strengths to outmaneuver the Empire while preserving their resources and minimizing collateral damage. Imperial officers were forced to acknowledge the truth. They had underestimated humanity. They had assumed that humans, long thought extinct, would be primitive or uncoordinated. Instead, humans had returned as masters of strategy and tactics, capable of outthinking, outmaneuvering, and outlasting the Empire's most advanced fleets. Every engagement had shown that preparation, intelligence, and patience could overcome raw numbers and technological superiority. The aftermath of the battle left the Empire reeling. Fleets had been decimated, communication networks disrupted, and morale shattered. Officers who had survived the engagement knew that they faced a new reality. Humanity was back, stronger and smarter than anyone had anticipated. Colonies that had been under Imperial control began to hope for a different future, seeing in the humans a force that could challenge the Empire's long-standing dominance. Even as the Empire struggled to recover, humans withdrew with precision. Ships returned to hidden bases, regrouping and preparing for the next phase of their strategy. The battle had been decisive, not only in physical terms, but also in psychological impact. Imperial leaders had been humbled, forced to recognize that the humans were a force unlike any they had faced before. Fear and respect replaced arrogance and confidence, and the Empire knew that future engagements would be even more difficult. In the quiet of the human command centers, officers reviewed the battle. Every maneuver, every strike, and every reaction of the Empire had been observed and analyzed. Lessons were noted, strategies refined, and preparations made for the next engagement. The humans had demonstrated their superiority, not through reckless destruction, but through intelligence, discipline, and control. Every officer knew that this was just the beginning, and that patience and precision would continue to defined their approach as they reshaped the galaxy's understanding of power. The Empire, meanwhile, faced a harsh reckoning. Their confidence shattered, their fleets diminished, and their leaders humbled. They had to confront a simple truth. Humans had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same. The battle had been a turning point, not only in terms of ships destroyed or territories disrupted, but in the understanding that even the most powerful empires could be challenged by a smaller, intelligent, and disciplined force. By the end of this engagement, it was clear to everyone. Humans had proven that patience, preparation, and strategic thinking were more powerful than arrogance and sheer numbers. The Empire had learned a lesson in humility and caution, one that would shape every decision moving forward. And for humans, the victory was not only in ships and technology, but in the knowledge that they had demonstrated their return in a way that could not be ignored, respected, or dismissed. The humans had proven themselves in battle, but they did not seek to annihilate the Empire entirely. Their goal had never been mindless destruction or revenge. Every strike, every maneuver, and every engagement had been carefully planned to demonstrate skill, strategy, and intelligence. Now, after weeks of calculated attacks and decisive victories, the humans were in a position of undeniable strength. Imperial fleets were diminished, communication networks were disrupted, and morale among officers and soldiers had been shaken to its core. For the first time, the Empire was forced to acknowledge that humans had returned, and that they were a force that could not be ignored. In the Imperial command centers, leaders were meeting in urgent and tense sessions. The generals, once confident and proud, now spoke in cautious, even fearful tones. Every decision was debated endlessly, as the memory of previous defeats and failed engagements haunted them. They realized that their old strategies, once so reliable, were no longer sufficient. The humans had changed the balance of power, and the Empire had to reconsider not only its military approach, but also the political and social structure that had supported its dominance for decades. Colonies across the Empire began to feel the impact of these changes. Some had already experienced the humans' presence, seeing their precision strikes and rapid disappearances. Others had heard the stories and felt the growing uncertainty in supply lines, trade routes, and military support. Among civilians, a mix of fear, hope, and curiosity began to spread. Many had suffered under the Empire's strict control for years, and the return of humanity gave them a sense of possibility they had not felt in generations. Humans, though powerful, acted with restraint, showing that their goal was not to destroy, but to establish a new balance, one in which fairness, strategy, and respect mattered. Meanwhile, the human fleet moved carefully but decisively. Every ship had a mission, every officer knew their role, and every strike was coordinated with precision. Engineers monitored systems tirelessly, pilots trained for every possible maneuver, and strategists analyzed Imperial responses to ensure that future operations would be even more effective. The humans had learned from every engagement, refining their tactics and understanding their enemy better with each encounter. Their strength was not only in their technology, but in their discipline, intelligence, and unity. In one sector, a meeting of human officers reflected on their accomplishments. "We did not destroy for the sake of power," one strategist said. "We demonstrated that intelligence, planning, and patience matter more than numbers or arrogance. The Empire now understands that we are not to be underestimated." The others nodded, knowing that the Empire's fear and respect were as valuable as any victory in battle. Their return was about more than territory. It was about proving that humanity could shape the galaxy through skill, courage, and careful action. Imperial officers, still reeling from previous defeats, struggled to formulate a coherent response. Every move they considered was weighed against the humans' apparent intelligence and unpredictability. Fleets were reinforced, outposts fortified, and communication networks repaired. But the humans' presence had changed the strategic landscape entirely. Even when they attempted to regroup and plan counterattacks, their efforts were hampered by doubt, fear, and a growing awareness of the human superiority in strategy and execution. Amid this tension, the humans began to engage diplomatically in subtle ways. They did not announce themselves across the galaxy in grandiose proclamations. Instead, their presence was felt through controlled, precise actions that forced the Empire to recognize them. Colonies under Imperial control began to experience a shift in power. Leaders who once relied on the Empire's support now faced the reality that humans could intervene, and the balance of authority slowly began to change. Humans were shaping the galaxy not only through battles but through strategy, perception, and the careful application of influence. In some regions, this influence brought hope. People who had lived under oppression saw in humans a force that acted with discipline and fairness. Unlike the Empire's often arbitrary rule, civilians began to whisper about the return of humanity, not as a threat, but as a promise of change. Markets, communication hubs, and social networks reflected this shift. Even small victories, like securing a supply route or protecting a colony, sent a clear message. Humans were back, and they could protect and guide, not just fight. The Empire, faced with undeniable evidence of human strength, finally began formal negotiations. For the first time, Imperial leaders approached the humans with caution and humility. They could no longer act with arrogance, and they had to accept that humans had earned the right to influence galactic politics. Meetings were held in remote sectors, carefully coordinated and closely monitored, where humans laid out their terms. Their approach was firm but measured, showing respect for life and structure while asserting their strength and capabilities. As discussions progressed, it became clear that humans were not seeking to dominate the galaxy. Their goal was balance, fairness, and recognition of their intelligence and presence. Territories were reassessed. Colonies that had been neglected or oppressed were offered protection, and agreements were drafted to prevent unnecessary conflict in the future. The humans had transformed the conversation from one of warfare to one of diplomacy, proving that their return was not chaotic but purposeful and strategic. Across the Empire, news of these developments spread slowly but surely. Colonies and systems far from the front lines began to feel a subtle shift. Imperial officers and leaders, who had once ruled with absolute confidence, were now aware that humans had not only survived, but had returned stronger, wiser, and more capable than anyone could have predicted. Ordinary people began to hope for a better future, seeing in humanity a force that valued intelligence, strategy, and fairness over brute power or oppression. The humans continued to operate with caution and foresight. Every strike, every demonstration of strength, and every diplomatic move was carefully calculated to reinforce the lesson that the Empire could not ignore them. They did not seek unnecessary destruction, and they did not act recklessly. Instead, they moved with precision, patience, and discipline, showing that power combined with wisdom was far more effective than fear or violence alone got in the empires. Command centers. Officers slowly came to terms with a new reality. Fear had been replaced with cautious respect, and arrogance had been tempered by understanding. The humans had returned, and they had done so not merely to fight, but to reshape the galaxy in ways that required thought, strategy, and cooperation. The Empire realized that it could no longer rely solely on power to maintain control. Intelligence, planning, and careful execution were now essential for survival. As months passed, humans solidified their influence. Colonies that had once been ignored or oppressed began to see improvements. Trade routes stabilized, supply lines became more secure, and civilian life, while still cautious, began to thrive under the subtle guidance and protection of human forces. Every action reinforced the lesson that humans had returned not just as warriors, but as thinkers, planners, and protectors. Their presence was no longer a mystery or a threat. It was a force of balance in a galaxy that had forgotten the value of patience, intelligence, and discipline. By the end of this period, it was undeniable. Humans had returned, not as a chaotic force, but as a calculated, disciplined, and powerful presence. The Empire had been humbled, and the galaxy had been reminded that intelligence and strategy could overcome arrogance, complacency, and even overwhelming numbers. Humanity's return had reshaped the political, military, and social landscape of the galaxy, proving that even those who were long thought lost could come back stronger, wiser, and unstoppable. In quiet corners of the galaxy, people spoke of the human fleet not with fear, but with respect. Stories of their precision, intelligence, and strategic genius spread from colony to colony. Humans were no longer invisible, no longer myths. They were a presence that demanded acknowledgement, respect, and careful consideration. The Empire had learned its lesson, and the galaxy had learned a new truth. Power was nothing without intelligence, and patience and strategy could change the course of history forever. The humans' return was complete. They had proven themselves in battle, reshaped political and social structures, and restored hope and balance to systems long under oppression. Their story became a lesson for the entire galaxy. Even when thought lost, intelligence, courage, and careful planning could rise again to shape the future. The Empire, humbled and wiser, now faced a galaxy that had been fundamentally changed by the return of humanity.